BSides DC would like to thank all of our sponsors, and a special thank you to all of our speakers, volunteers, and organizers for making 2018 a success.
Hey everybody, my name is Rachel Lininger, and I'm here to talk to you about the exciting topic of compliance. Are you okay? Yeah. All right, here's why you should listen to me. Actually, I don't know why, but I'm kind of a risk enthusiast. I've been in information security for 15 years. Most of that's in GRC for some reason. I have all the stupid certifications that you want. I'm currently between jobs, but I am moving to DC in a month to start work here. And if you have any questions or want to yell at me about my talk, there's my contact information. It will come up again at the end. So what are we going to do? First, we're going to talk about GRC. We're going to introduce and talk about some principles. Then I'm going to give you a quick background of the exciting US landscape of compliance. I'll talk you through a minimalist GRC program that really does work and doesn't hurt nearly as bad. And I'm also going to do a little brief explainer on talking to assessors because they're really not that scary, only a little bit scary. So what's GRC? It stands for Governance, Risk, and Compliance. Why are we doing it? Why? Here is your existential scream. Who here loves audits? Assessments? Keep your hands up. All two of you who had your hands up. Checklists? Findings? Corrective action plans? Policy exceptions? Vendor questionnaires? Nobody's hand is still up. If you get paid for any of these, it doesn't count. What about knowing that the latest logo vuln was patched? Who likes that? Knowing for sure which boxes weren't patched and why. Yeah, I see some people liking this stuff. Payroll asks you first before they send $1 million to the CEO in Romania. The latest issue with your vendor is covered in your contract, and so they can't tell you to go pound sand. That's kind of fun. You have a budget to fix things. Who likes that? Yeah. You don't get any of that without GRC. Sorry. GRC stands for governance. Governance is all the, oh great, there's a bug. Governance is all the standards, policies, processes, exceptions. It's writing down your decisions about what you're going to do about security and what you're doing now. Preferably, you do this once and write it down rather than having people figure it out again every single time. That does not make for a very consistent environment. Risk. Risk is a probable frequency and probable magnitude of future loss. That's from FAIR. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what risk management really is, it's strategizing what's actually important, what you need to do, and what you can skip, because it's not that important. Compliance is checking your work to make sure it got done. It's keeping yourself honest. Why don't we like being held accountable for stuff? We really don't. But then there's what GRC is most places. Pain. Useless, stupid, busy work that doesn't lead to any changes, doesn't lead to improvements, doesn't actually hold anyone accountable, and doesn't actually work. But wait, it's even worse than this, or better than this, depending on your point of view. Somehow we all got the idea that pain is considered a feature of GRC. Anyone who tries to tell you something different can't sell you anything. This is part of our role as practitioners. When I was a consultant, we kept trying to sell simplicity and doing things right the first time and making it work. And people weren't buying. They wanted the 400-pound gorilla for their, tiny startup or whatever. Okay. But GRC can be simple. It does not have to be this way. It's going to be fun. Cleaning your room is not always fun, but at the end of it, you get a clean room. That's kind of nice. It shouldn't be a stupid waste of time. So there's 3 more principles that I want to talk about that are important for this. They're important for understanding what we're going to do in the rest of the talk. First of all, what's the purpose of regulations? It's correcting externalities. Is everyone here familiar with externalities? Externalities are a concept in economics. It's the idea that sometimes someone does something and someone else pays for it. I pollute the river, you people downstream, that's your problem, I don't care. It could also be like everyone somehow deciding that our multi-factor authentication was going to go to SMS, de facto making the telecoms the registration authority for all identities. That was a real smart idea, that one. The basic rule for regulation, and this isn't always true, it doesn't always happen, but it's not just there to trample the flowers and stifle innovation, it's making it so that the big guys can't hurt the little guys whenever they want just because they can. That's sort of what regulation is for. That's not actually that bad an idea and that terrible. What's the point of security controls in contracts? It's so you have recourse when things go wrong. That's kind of cool. And finally, my favorite, what is the point of a metric? Metrics are measuring things in order to do something. If you can't measure it, if you can't do anything about it, don't measure it. It's a waste of time. If you don't want to admit you can't do anything about it, everyone who's ever bought a pen test and didn't fix the findings, if you don't want to admit that, that's a different problem. You should be working on that instead of trying to get more information that you're not going to use. To deal with this, you may want to come to my next talk on inner peace through security nihilism. So here's a little philosophical digression, but it's important. What is a measurement? One of my favorite InfoSec books is Douglas Hubbard, How to Measure Anything, and How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk. He's talking to an audience that okay, yeah, you have to say cyber, sorry. But it's a great book. Measurement is a quantitatively expressed reduction of uncertainty based on one or more observations. Reducing uncertainty a little bit doesn't cost much, but you can reduce uncertainty a lot for that first step. If you want to reduce uncertainty more, it starts costing a lot more. Are you going to use that? Is that worthwhile? Are you getting your return on investment for those measurements? Maybe not. If you're not, don't do them. Honestly, I think one of the biggest reasons InfoSec people burn out all the time, and we talk about that, is we're spending all this time gathering information that we do nothing about and we know is useless. Who likes that part? Everybody likes that part, right? Yeah, no. I'm not saying you shouldn't measure important stuff. I am saying you should only measure important stuff. If you're not going to do anything about it, then that measurement wasn't that important anyway. Now was it? Don't do it. There are organizations that are really mature and they can measure everything and they kind of do stuff about it and it's really neat. But you only get to that place if you start off being honest with yourself about where you are now. So this has been the most important part of my talk. If you're bored or if you know what to do now or whatever, feel free to go. It's all down here from here. Because now we get to the exciting whirlwind tour of the US landscape. This is going to be quick. It's just going to be a high-level sketch. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but it helps to know sort of what's out there and what it's for. So what do you do in the US? You've got data security regulations. Most states have something. They're all a little bit different. Some of the bigger municipalities have something. That's exciting too. Depends on where you are, where you do business. Privacy is mostly other countries. PIPEDA in Canada, GDPR. If you've got business overseas, that's when you really need to know about privacy. But it's coming. To be perfectly honest, I don't think it's going to do much good here when it does. I think that ship sailed in the 1930s. Anyone know what happened in the 1930s? About privacy? Yes, we got the Social Security Administration. And we had a lot of rules about what governments could do about those IDs because we didn't want government tracking. But almost no rules about what corporations could do with them. That is from Simon Garfinkel's Database Nation, which is quite an old book, but it really helps with the history of what on earth we were on when we did all this, basically. So next we're going to talk about HIPAA and high tech. They're for healthcare companies, health insurance companies, and any of their suppliers. So if your customers are healthcare entities, you probably need to know about HIPAA. That's HIPAA, not HIPAA as in hippo. One thing to know is that you don't get HIPAA certified. If someone talks about getting HIPAA certified, or especially about you paying them lots of money for them to help you get HIPAA certified, they are wrong, they are confused, and they are quite possibly very incompetent. There is no HIPAA certification. There is, you have a breach, and the OCR comes and talks to you and sees if you're compliant. That's how you know you're HIPAA compliant, is you have a breach, and OCR says, well, it sucks. If you weren't compliant, OCR says, so let's talk. Don't get audited by OCR. FERPA, regulations for student records. GLBA and FFIEC, regulations for financial institutions and insurance companies. So health insurance companies get lots of regs. Oh, and I meant to say, some people got budget with Sarbanes-Oxley. I'm sure you all have heard of it. It's not directly an information security regulation. It's about knowing your financial controls worked. And so that touches on information security, but kind of isn't really, but that's where that came from. FSMA and FedRAMP. I'm sure nobody here has anything to do with either of these. FSMA, regulations for the US government and how they do security. FedRAMP, they decided that, hey, maybe we should look into this cloud thing. You know, what, it came out a couple years ago? So, speedy. Now we're on to the voluntary stuff, and by voluntary I really mean voluntary. Payment card industry data security standard. It's not a regulation, kind of acts like one, because it's a contract, and if you want to process or have anything to do with a credit card, you need to do it. PCI is kind of not a normal contract. Really what it is risk transfer from the payment card industry to you personally, and you can't get out of it. You're stuck with it if you want a credit card. It's been around about 15 years. It is freaking amazing. I wish I knew how they did that. I don't think anyone will be able to do it again. SOC 1 and 2, Type 1 and 2. These are fun and very confusing. They're what happens when accountants decide they need to deal with security. SOC stands for System and Organization Controls. Since it is very confusing, here's a SOC magic quadrant. SOC 1, the rules are all for your internal financial controls, and you can pick whatever you want for your security controls. There's nothing specific that you have to do. SOC 2, you use the trust services criteria, which is the AICPA's security controls. Type 1, you say you did it, and the accountant comes and writes a report that says you said you did it. Type 2, the accountant actually sort of reviews what you did over a 6-month period and whether or not you actually did it. You've probably also heard of SOC 3, that's just your customer-facing letter. So that makes an awful lot of sense, not, but that's how it breaks down. They're really picky about their Arabic and Roman numerals, don't ask me why. Except I shouldn't do that. High trust. Here, let me fix that. High trust is my favorite. High trust is a full employment program for consultants. You see it mostly in healthcare vertical, but it's not just healthcare. HITRUST is a superset of every single regulation, PCI, contract, whatever that you're subject to based on where you are, how many hospital beds you have, how many credit card transactions you process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's the closest thing I know of to a punishment regime in this space. It's not really regulation, it's a certification. Clients I've had who've done it have had upwards of 1,000 artifacts of compliance proving they were following all of the controls they needed to follow. It's kind of like they took what people imagined GRC is supposed to be and they made it real. Catch-22 was a warning, not an instruction manual. And finally, there's the contracts you have signed with your suppliers and your customers. The sky is the limit here. Check what your salespeople are doing. Sure, you can get HITRUST certification. That'll happen. Sure, we'll indemnify you 100%. That'll happen too. It's up to you what you do here. I do recommend kind of keeping track of it. That's usually a good idea. I don't know, might bite you if you don't. Now we're going to talk about frameworks, and there's 5 that sort of matter that I see most often. Frameworks are just a scaffolding. They make it a lot easier to do your work. They tell you, okay, here are controls to think about, here's what to do, but they don't actually do any of it for you. They don't say you have to do this, that, and the other. NIST 853, you all are familiar with this. It is not a reg, that's FSMA, which I'm sure most people here know, but some people don't. It's very complicated, it's very comprehensive, and one of the fun features is that it requires impact ratings, where you go through each system and say, is this a low, a medium, or high impact system? You're almost certainly medium. No, seriously, you are. You're medium. On the other hand, doing that work to show it is kind of a pain in the butt. Trust services criteria. That's what the AICPA did. It's what accountants do when information security doesn't step up. It's aligned with the COSO framework for internal financial controls. COSO is the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Committee, or Treadway Commission, and like, they're accountants, okay? COBIT is another accounting framework. It's also related to COSO. Stands for Control Objectives for Information and Related Technologies. I guess the R is silent. The main difference between COBIT and TSC is that COBIT is kind of its scope. COBIT kind of covers everything. TSC just covers what COSO doesn't directly cover. Those are the big differences there. We've got the CIS Critical Security Controls, also known as the SANS Top 20. Who knew that they were the same thing? I actually didn't for a long time. I was so confused.
You're in the right room this time.
Yeah, I was terribly, terribly confused for a while, but they are actually the same thing. Center for Internet Security makes the critical security controls. SANS does a lot of training on them. That's what's going on with that. The prioritized list of controls is great. The benchmarks are soul destroying. They should be easy. It would be great if organizations could easily identify unauthorized devices on their network within an hour. How many of you work for a place that can do that reliably? Yeah, it causes despair. I like them, I like referencing them, I don't want to use them because the benchmarks make me cry. And finally, we've got ISO 27000 series. These are actually my favorite, so like ignore everything I say about them because I like them, but they're pretty comprehensive, they're pretty flexible. I could have talked about them before because you can get certified in them, but certifications can be very narrowly scoped and may not mean much. But ISO is very handy, and most people recognize it. That's another good thing. So that's the exciting background. And now we're going to talk about how to do a minimalist compliance program that actually works. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know why you're doing it. You need to be able to show your work. And that's kind of the part we hate most, is showing your work, but it does kind of need to happen. That's the cleaning your room part of this. And you need to make sure you're actually getting results. What you don't want to do is make these binders full of auditor bane that are just sitting on a desk being ignored. That doesn't help anybody. So what do you need? You need written policies and procedures. We need to agree on what we're doing and what we're going to do. Policies can and should be very short and clear, but most of them aren't. Most of them are really long. They're written in legalese, and they kind of conflict with themselves. And at best, they're just not very clear. That's a problem. There's more than one way to do a lot of things that you need to do. And people who know what they're doing can pick different ways. You need to write down which way your organization is going with so people can be consistent. So I have totally stolen this from my friends at Smooth Sailing Consulting, but it's really great. Policy. Simple statement, the dog will be clean. Standard, we're gonna wash the dog every week. Well, the kids will wash the dog. You have to say who. The kids are going to wash the dog every week in the backyard, in the kiddie pool, with the dog shampoo. The procedure is, first step, you got to catch the dog. The procedure needs to be enough to be able to comply with this. And you probably want an out-of-band procedure for when the dog runs into a local villain like the skunk. So next we've got asset management. I almost put this first because you can't really do much without it. It's not traditionally an InfoSec. Why can't we keep track of our stuff? I mean, really, just why? This is probably why the accountants got so mad at us that they made TSC and COBIT and High Trust and SOC 1 and 2 and all the rest of this. They kind of have a point. But accountants are really good at tracking assets, so it is a good idea to ask them for help. But unfortunately, I did say you had to go first with a policy because you do need a policy on what assets you're going to track. If you say asset inventory, what do people think of first? They think of your physical devices. Is that enough? No. You might want stuff like, oh, what domain names you own. The TLS certificates that you need to keep refreshed. VM pools, where all your data is in the cloud. Because it would be kind of bad to forget about that S3 bucket with all your data, maybe? I don't know, that's never happened, right? Management. Risk management is about what's important and what isn't. Currently, the way we do it is overcomplicated, based on kind of bad assumptions, and it doesn't really work so great. It's a big topic, so I'm going to refer you to my last BSides talk on a minimum viable risk management program. I wrote a white paper. It's about a dozen pages. I tried really hard not to put it in the passive-aggressive tense. There's also a YouTube talk if you find you can stand listening to me talk for an hour. How many times have you filled out 20 or 100 questions about an asset in order to do a risk assessment? And has that done you any good? Mostly this is just a waste of time. There are better ways to do it. The process I wrote about, it works. It fits with NIST 830, and it actually passed a high trust audit. Seriously, the only thing the auditors asked for was they wanted us to put the words confidentiality, integrity, and availability in the policy. Okay, we'll do that, no problem. They thought the process was fine, and it was dead simple. So, you don't have to use that. You can find some other way to do risk management. Just find something simple that you actually do the risk management instead of spending all your time on gathering information that you don't use, like I said before. Vendor management. So if your vendor goes out of business, what are they doing with your data? Selling it for bankruptcy? Who has your data? Who do you rely on for payroll? What are your dependencies for uptime? Who's running their lousy ad code on your servers? I have no idea. You know, if your vendor fails to deliver, can you do anything about it? Or would you even notice? That's what vendor management's all about. If you're sending out vendor security questionnaires, use a standard like Google's VSAC or SIG-Lite, or even just a shorter version of each if you know you're not going to do some questions. Everybody wants to put their own custom questions in there. You know what happens? The salesperson answers, and you have to go to the security folks there for clarification. You have to get people in a meeting, and it's really, really hard, but you were going to have to do that anyway because the salespeople answered. Just use the standard form, get the standard answer which they have already vetted and done, and then ask your questions from there. It does not actually save time to ask the custom stuff up front. If you are receiving vendor questionnaires, ask them if they'll take the standard form that you've already done and vetted. They won't always do it. If you're trying to deal with a really, really big company, you know, they might tell you to pound sand, no, you're answering our questions. But a lot of times they'll say, oh, you have that. Oh, okay, whatever. It can happen. We have a tendency to try to outsource everything. That's sort of the thing now. We outsource all of it, but we can't outsource the risk. You know, we still have to deal with that risk. And finally, you need some kind of office system. You need something for ticketing, you need stuff for version control, you need stuff for document management. Jira, GitHub, Office 365, done. Or use whatever you prefer, I don't care. It doesn't actually matter that much. You do not need a GRC tool unless you are so big that, you know, you're not here at this talk, you're in a giant organization. You don't need a GRC tool. They're expensive, they're complicated, they're also full employment programs for professional services. As Winston Churchill said, Excel is the worst GRC tool, except for all the others that have been tried from time to time. And is this really all? Yeah, pretty much. So you're going to need some kind of vulnerability management program. Okay, that's risk and asset management. You know, you need a policy. You need to know where your assets are and how to get to them and who can do it. And you need to know which vulns are worth patching. Before you add anything other than stuff on my list, even if all the cool kids have it, check to see, can you do anything about it? Is it worth doing? And will it give you the results you want? You know, you can scan for vulnerabilities all day. If you never patch anything, what has that got you? It's got you a very annoyed security engineer. That's what it's got you. Yeah. And so last, we're going to talk about the aliens. These are the assessors. I've been an assessor. It's a process, and it helps to know what the process is. They're going to have a list of things they have to check. They will be more or less obvious that they are running through a list. It can be annoying, whatever. You know, sometimes they just want to talk. Sometimes they need to ask you for evidence, like there's going to be, they want screenshots or ticket numbers or whatever. So it helps to assume that the assessor is as well-meaning and competent as anyone else you work with. Have you ever found that assuming someone you don't know yet that you work with is a moron helpful? It's kind of fun, but not actually helpful. Most auditors are going to understand compensating controls. Not everyone does. I've had colleagues in the field who don't. But most of them will get it. Remember, the point of regulation is so that the people with power are not squishing the people without. And it can be a very localized kind of power. You may not think you have power, but you're still able to drop that pollutant in the river or whatever. That's a power. As long as you have a way to not do that, they're frequently going to be okay with it, even if it isn't on their, list of how they expect you not to do that. One really important thing to understand for us, findings just aren't that big a deal usually. They're just information. Management will often flip out. A lot of people will flip out. But it's just information. Okay, so this doesn't work. How do we fix it? There's one big exception. Well, two big exceptions. One of them is if you were just completely ignoring the regulation or lying. That will not go well for you. The other exception is PCI. If you're breached, you obviously weren't compliant. There's not much you can do about that. Target couldn't do anything about that. Do you think you can, outweigh Target on this kind of thing? No, you're just kind of stuck with it. It's not a reg, it's not a normal kind of contract. It is a risk transfer and you are accepting the risk. Have a nice life. If you assume that the assessor is hostile, there's a pretty good chance they'll get hostile back. When I did assessments, the first 5 minutes or sometimes the first 15 minutes was spent assuring people, no, I'm not trying to get you fired. It can actually be, if you're a good assessor, you can talk people down. But that can actually get pretty difficult sometimes. And if someone is just terrified of you or pissed off at you, it might come back. It helps not to be that upset in the first place. If you treat assessors like they're stupid, that's not going to go well either. I'm sure everybody here enjoys being treated as if they were a moron, and that brings out the best in you at all times, right? All those big HIPAA fines that you hear about, they included some degree of willful disregard. They were really ignoring stuff. This wasn't the regulators were mean. They were really ignoring stuff. If you straight up ignore the reg, if you lie to the auditor, it is not going to go well for you. But most of the time, a good faith effort is really enough. And I can't emphasize that more. Good faith really does do it. Even with high trust, a good faith effort is enough. They're just going to ask you for another 100 artifacts of compliance, but the good faith was enough. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to make your compliance program not stupid. Burn all those binders full of auditor bang. Make sure the stuff you're doing actually matters. Make sure you know why you're doing it and it's actually doing some good. We have far more control than we realize. And every make work stupid task we do is time that we're not spending doing something that matters. So instead of not doing the compliance stuff or ignoring the compliance stuff, make the compliance stuff matter. It's really hard to work in a dirty room, okay? So here we go. Questions? Yeah.
Yeah, do you have any advice for selling a program like this to engineers? I find the biggest pushback is from the technical side and not the business side.
The question is that, do you have any advice for selling the program to engineers? Because the biggest pushback is from the technical side. That was kind of the purpose of this talk. Point out the dread private robbers thing. We choose, in a lot of cases, we choose the pain. The concept of a full employment program for compliance, on the one hand, we kind of hate it, but on the other hand, we like our jobs, and so we want to make sure nobody else can do them, and making things simple makes that hard. The best way that I can think of is to talk about all the stuff they can be doing that's better than jumping their little self-imposed pain treadmill. That's the best answer I have. I mean, it's been something I've been working on. You know, I know a bunch of consultants who want to sell simplicity and can't. They're like, you want to pay me money to do this the hard way? Okay. I'd rather do it the easy way. You could pay a lot less. No, no, you want to give me more money. It's kind of hard to expect them to turn it down. Yeah?
Thanks to Uber, I got here a lot later than I would have liked. What I saw was very good or better. Can I email you for your presentation so I can catch the parts I didn't, or should I just go watch the links you gave?
I believe that the video is going to be posted.
Oh.
You missed all the exciting stuff at the beginning with me not having the right dongle and then not being mic'd. So there is a video and it will be posted.
But parts of it won't have audio.
No, I restarted. I restarted.
Okay, I'm just kidding. Never mind. Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
I'd like to comment about not filling out a 100 questionnaire in terms of how to decide on the risk of the system. I mean, what are some recommendations in terms of when we have had to classify a system or maybe identify kind of how high-value systems? What's the alternative approach that has worked?
So, okay, so I reference people to my other paper, and I kind of hate doing that because I like talks to be self-contained, but doing an entire risk management program, it does take a whole hour. I don't know anyone else who can do it in under an hour, but it does take the whole hour. What I recommend is a combination of binary risk assessment. That's at binary.protect.io, and everything is in the white paper. That's a 10 question, you know, does the asset have a vulnerability? Is a vulnerability always there or sometimes not? You know, you answer them yes, no, and you figure out a risk rating. And then that gives you not a whole lot of information. What I like about it is it doesn't have the fake rigor that the 100 question things do, because you do a lot of work, so it feels like you're getting a lot of information here, right? Yeah, no. If that is not enough, then I recommend moving to FAIR, which is Factor Analysis of Information Risk, which is, for my money, the best way to assess information security risk out there. It is quantitative, but it doesn't have to be. It is super cool. It's from Jack Jones. You're shaking your head at me.
Why? FAIR, I'd say you have to have a lot of expertise in terms of what
the white paper is about building that expertise through binary, and then when you need more information, and only when you need more information, doing FAIR. So it's actually doable, and it has worked. Yeah?
Have you used FAIR in any client engagements?
Yes.
And have those clients actually gone through and used those deliverables to actually support one of the frameworks that you've mentioned?
I would have to ask about that.
Okay.
What we did with FAIR, well, there's a couple clients we've used it with. One of them, I think it's more that we built the program for them and they're going to use FAIR someday. They're still working on it. Another one, we actually did FAIR analyses for them. I know that they used that analysis. I don't know if they're continuing to use it going forward. I did provide a bunch of suggested, here's how you do some other ones. You know, there's a lot of stuff out there on FAIR. If you look at RiskLens, that's the company that does the tool for FAIR, which is not necessary, but pretty cool. They have like client testimonials and stuff like that. And B of A apparently will talk to anybody at the drop of a hat. Yeah?
How do you deal with risk management in the cloud where everything is inherited and no one's willing to tell you anything?
Pretty much. But here's the thing. This was like more honest than 90% of the answers you will get from any consultant, and it costs a lot less. One of the problems with information, especially risk management, and I talk about this in the white paper a lot, is we spend an awful lot of money getting very useful, getting not very useful information. Spend a lot less money and deal with the fact that you have less information because you know that you have as much information as you could actually use anyway. This is why my next talk is going to be Inner Peace Through Security Nihilism. I've been making this joke enough, I'm going to have to do it now, aren't I? But a lot of things with the cloud, you can kind of tell. You can kind of tell that someone's on the ball. It's like with food safety. You don't go to a restaurant and say, everything here with the food safety is on point and perfect except for the rats running around. God damn it. No, if they have rats, they have everything else. And you can use that information to get a much better idea of what's going on than by listening to the salespeople. A lot of the bigger cloud providers are now doing stuff like signing BAAs, providing not just SOC 3s, but SOC 2 information, and similar stuff like that. You know, I hate to say it, but if someone's actually gone to the trouble of getting a SOC 2, they're probably better than someone else. And I'm not super in love with SOC 2 either, but there's also some of this is the only game in town. And I'm not sure that that's the answer you wanted, but it's the one that I have. I don't know that it's right, but yeah.
Do you have any concrete examples of, in your experience, what doesn't matter, what can be dropped, what doesn't need to be tracked, what's useless?
It's very, she asked what concrete examples of what matters, what doesn't, what can be dropped. And it's very context dependent. A lot of it is our organization consistently refuses to do this, so let's stop pretending that we're doing it. And again, if you don't want to admit that you're not doing it, then you need to deal with that problem. Frequently, the very detailed risk assessments get you a lot more information about risk, but you're not using it anyway, so why do it? That's something I really recommend dropping a lot of the time. You know, vulnerability scans, if you're doing them constantly, but things aren't changing that fast, maybe you don't need to do them that often. Is that helpful?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, some of those things we have to do by law or a certain frequency.
Right, and sometimes the risk that you're dealing with is auditor risk. So like, just know that. This is why we're doing this. We're not pretending to do it because we're going to do the patching. This is why we're doing it. But I think that they're waving frantically for time. So I think we're done. If anybody has questions, come up and yell at me. All right, thank you.